All right, you're listening to 91.5 WUML Lowell Blues Deluxe, and I have Seth Rosenbloom with me today. How are you, Seth?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
Good. You're welcome. It was fun to see you with Matt Schofield a month ago.
Yeah, at TCAN that was a fun night.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see you and Sonia and well, Tomo. I'm used to seeing because he's there usually with him every time he comes. But to see four guitar players up there was crazy. It was great.
It was a lot of guitar on a decently small stage. Yeah.
So I wanted to get to know you. I'm gonna do an interview with Sonia too because it was great to see you guys out there supporting Matt, supporting Tomo, and that whole thing, and getting out and playing again. Actually,
It's nice to be back out playing in front of people. I mean, the last couple of years has been a lot less of that.
can you imagine that it's been 2 years? I think about that and go, it's amazing that it's been 2 years that we haven't done much.
Yeah, it's a really kind of strange sense of time over the last 2 years because in a way it feels like it's been forever, and then in other ways it feels like February 2020 was a couple months ago. It feels super recent. I mean, I had been really busy and pretty much constantly on the road from late 2019 into early 2020, and then of course everything just came to a halt very abruptly.
Yeah, your first full length album came out in 2019, so you were supporting that in 2020, and then everything fell out of the bottom in about March or April of that year.
Yeah, I was lucky. I got a full over a full year of support in for that record because that came out January 2019. So was busy 2019 into early 2020. But I mean, I can tell you the date of the last gig I played pre-COVID was March 12th. Um, I remember I'd played a gig the 10th. My mom's birthday is the 11th, and then was down at Black Eyed Sally's in Hartford on the 12th. And already, the calls and texts were going around of, should we really be doing this? And then, figured it would be a couple weeks off, and it turned into, almost a couple years of not all that much. But it's definitely good to be back out and, playing a lot again now because have undoubtedly missed that a lot over the last couple of years.
So let's go back to the beginning with you. Where did you grow up?
Sure. So, I mean, I started off playing guitar when I was 11, but that was already a decent way into my musical upbringing. My parents were both musicians. My dad was a violinist, so he played in a lot of the Boston orchestras. And, because of that, I started off super young on the violin, around 3 or 4. At that point, it's everyone kind of does the thing of you see what your parents are doing and you want to do it too. So I started off on violin pretty young, but I was always also into, the Beatles. My mom was a huge Beatles fan. The Beatles, James Brown, Elvis. So a lot of blues based stuff. And started playing guitar around 11. I know the kind of impetus for that, I saw the movie School of Rock when it was in theaters. And all I wanted after that was a guitar, started playing at that point, and then, here we are today, a good, I guess, coming up on 18, 19 years since I started playing guitar. So, yeah.
You're a local guy. Where are you now? Where do you live now?
I'm out in Western Massachusetts. So I was raised in Eastern Mass in Waltham. So from, right outside Boston, and spent my early and mid 20s bouncing around a little bit. I lived down in Nashville briefly. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina for a couple of years. But when I really started touring, made my way back up to Massachusetts. And then I've been out in Western Mass for about a year now.
Wow. There's a lot of nice places to play in Western Mass.
There's a pretty good scene out here. I mean, where I am, I'm about an hour getting down to Hartford. So in turn, about 40 minutes or so down to Springfield. And, Theodore's has been a stopping point there for years. And then there's some good rooms. I mean, there's a great room doing a lot of stuff in Holyoke, Gateway City Art Center. Played there a few months back. And then there Northampton has a few good rooms, and there's a really good collection of musicians who live out here. With the Boston area housing market, it's pushed a lot of the people who don't necessarily have the means to be buying in Metro West further out. But it's a nice area. I've enjoyed it a lot so far.
Mention some of the other people, the other artists that are in the area that you are. That because I've dealt with a lot of people from a lot of blues musicians from Central Mass. Um,
Yeah, and I mean I'm well past Central Mass. I'm kind of on the, I-91 corridor going, between Brattleboro and Hartford. Darby Wolf, who's an awesome organ player that I play with quite a bit, he's out here. Alan Evans, who's a great drummer from the band Soul Live. He has a studio out here. So it's a really, really good scene that I think is just a little less visible than, the real Boston area scene. But
so
there's a lot going on out here. And it's just, I think, as a musician, the nightmare, and I've done it before, no one wants to be doing apartment living because it's hard to make a lot of noise and hard to practice and late night. So it's easier when you can be in, I mean, I'm in a neighborhood, but I know that I can play late at night. Even, I'm not trying to assault my neighbors with volume, but I can get away with at least playing whenever I want to and having a little more freedom in that way.
you mentioned Alan Evans, one of my favorite drummers.
Great drummer. I think his studio, I've
Wow.
never been in there, but I have some friends that work there a lot. His studio is about 10, 15 minutes from where I live. So, there's a lot going on out here, and it's a nice area. I mean, growing up, my grandparents lived in Northampton, so I spent quite a bit of time out in Western Mass. So I was already somewhat familiar with that area. So I've enjoyed it a lot.
And you ever work with Alan? Does he? Have you ever played with him?
Have not played with him, have heard him on gigs. He actually plays in a project with Darby Wolf, the organ player that I play with quite a bit. And they do kind of I'd say it's like a funk kind of soul band. But I have never played with Alan, no.
Wow. Yeah, I love Soul Live,
It's great stuff. It's great stuff.
and so doesn't Matt Schofield. He covered one of their tunes on one of his records.
Did he? Which tune was it?
The early record. It's a live album. He does Uncle Junior,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah,
a
I know.
Soul
I've
Live
I've
tune.
definitely listened to that. That's the his trio record way
Yeah,
back.
yeah, it's really good. It's sometimes he'll pull that out and play it, and it surprises me when he does. Sometimes.
Yeah, no, Matt's a fantastic guitar player and musician. Always a pleasure playing with him.
Well, that's cool. You mentioned Alan Evans because I'm a big Soul Live fan, and he's not too far from you. That's even better.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's get back to you. Growing up, you were listening to stuff your parents were listening to. How'd you morph into the blues? Where did that start?
I mean, I think the early stuff I trace it all back to the Motown stuff and the Elvis because that is you listen to especially early Elvis, and I was way more into 50s Elvis of Hound Dog and Heartbreak Hotel and all that than later kind of Vegas Elvis. So I was getting that blues influence, and that was actually especially credit to my grandmother. I mean, I remember she was a huge Elvis fan and would be over there and we'd be listening to Elvis records, or at that point, I guess, cassettes. But I do give a lot of credit to around 11 or so. I started playing guitar, and the first stuff I was really into was British invasion kind of blues. So, I heard Cream really early on. I heard Zeppelin early on. And it was kind of the basic Cream and Zeppelin of, it was Sunshine of Your Love and Crossroads. And it was, for Zeppelin, it was I Can't Quit You, Baby. And some of the stuff that, especially taking Crossroads and I Can't Quit You, Baby, those are just blues songs that are a little louder and a little more distorted. So I got into that pretty early on, and then I really went off on a tangent of I was more into rock and harder rock. It went through the whole, teenage metal phase and all of that around, by 12, 13 was listening to Metallica and Dream Theater and all that stuff. And I guess the thing that really sparked the interest in playing blues, and I've told this story a bunch of times, but it does come back to this one of I was 13. My favorite band at that time was Dream Theater, and they were coming to the Orpheum in Boston. And I wanted to go see them and asked my parents if I could go. And of course, they said, there's no chance you're going to the Orpheum alone. You're 13, which looking back, probably pretty reasonable. But my parents, of course, with their background, huge supporters of music, and always, for me, whatever I wanted to go see, hear, play, always super supportive. So my mom said, you know what? I'll buy you tickets. I'll take you. In exchange to do that, you have to go to any show that I pick. And I said,
all right.
Okay,
that's
fine.
good.
So she found a listing in the Boston Globe, arts and culture section, whatever, music section. And it was a show at Sculler's Jazz Club. And of course, I heard Jazz Club and didn't want to go.
No, I don't want to do that.
13 wasn't my thing. So, and it had been like a listing for up and coming blues guitar player. And somehow she got the jazz really infused in there too, of thinking it was a jazz guitarist. Well, this was about 2005, probably 2005 or early 2006. It was Joe Bonamassa playing Scullers. So very much not a jazz show, very much a kind of rocking blues show. And that show changed my life in terms of what I wanted to play. I mean, I was more excited to go to the Dream Theater show, but I was absolutely blown away because I think anyone who's been to a bunch of small club performances, even like the show at TCAN, there's something about being in that intimate environment and being really up close and personal that does something, it hits you a bit differently than being in a big theater. Not that I don't love going to, big theater shows, but it's just different. And coming out of that one, it took some time for me to still want to really play blues and focus on that. But that was the real spark for me.
So since that day, have you ever seen Joe after that? And have you ever had a conversation with him about the first time you saw him there?
I have. I have told him that story. Yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah. And he said, I think the response was, how old are you? That's making me feel old.
That was his early time, too. He was just coming out of the band he was in. I forget the name of the band. He was still young back then.
I think around then he was probably about the age I am now. He was kind of late 20s, but I still remember he closed out that show with a cover, and he has an album titled after it, but Jeff Beck Band Blues Deluxe.
Right.
Ended the show with that, and that was for me. I think that kind of sparked my love of slow blues, and there's nothing quite like that. So yeah, that show was definitely kind of a game changer for me. And then after that, I was definitely one of those that started tracing stuff back. Of it's like, got into definitely listening to Joe, listening to some of the other more contemporary blues guitar players, probably around that time. Also found like the Johnny Langs of the world, the Kenny Wayne Shepherds, and through that really traced stuff back. So through that found Stevie, through that found Albert King, through that, and you can really trace a lot of those guys back. I had listened to Stevie before I had listened to Albert King, and it was like the light bulb went off the first time I really listened to Albert. It's like, oh, that's where a good bit of Stevie's vocabulary is coming from. Like that's where those bends are coming from. That's where that's all really starting. And then you trace that back further. And it's like, I always think listening to B.B. King, who one of my all-time favorite blues performers, maybe my favorite, of you listen to the early B.B. King stuff. So like 3 O'Clock Blues, which I think was released in, you probably know this better than me, but
The
I think
50s.
1953, I believe.
Yeah.
And you hear him on that, and of course you think, okay, 53. Well, at that point, he wasn't playing the guitar he was famous for because it didn't exist. He wasn't playing a 335 or 345 with light strings. He was playing an ES5. He was basically trying to be T-Bone Walker at that point. And you listen to the vocabulary and what he's playing on there, it very much sounds like a T-Bone Walker record. And I always think it's cool where you listen to the early stuff and then listen to 10 or so years later of Live at the Regal, and you see that development and how his sound changed, how his playing changed, and how he really in those years, developed his own voice.
Yep. And his own sound. His sound evolved over time.
Oh, without a doubt. And even past that, of past Live at the Regal, you get into the later 60s stuff, you get into the 80s stuff. And there are those players, and I think the ones that stand out most to me, BB's definitely there in a lot of ways. And then like a Jeff Beck, who just, the change over the span of the career in the sound and really never stopping that development and kind of nurturing of the sound that trying to get.
You know who BB's biggest influence was?
I mean, what I hear there is T-Bone Walker.
Lonnie Johnson.
Robert Johnson?
No, Lonnie Johnson.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He very many interviews he talked about how he was influenced by what Lonnie Johnson was doing from the earlier, going back even earlier. You want to talk about a guitar player? He was something else. I don't know if you've heard any of his stuff, but he's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he comes in. He comes from the 20s.
Yep.
And he was playing in the 60s, and during that time when all the blues artists were playing over in Europe. He was one of the guys that was there in his 70s, and he was still killing it, playing great guitar.
Yeah. And, it's interesting when you look back on a lot of the video footage of whether it's less so BB, but definitely with Freddie King and with some of the early video footage, it's all Europe. Because, here the clubs were still segregated and those artists were not put into the spotlight that they were deserving of. And Europe was eating it up. Front row over there were guys like Jeff Beck and the Stones and the Beatles and all of them really credited a lot of that blues that was being promoted and played over in Europe.
Well, the number one guitar player in that era, the 20s and 30s, was Lonnie Johnson. Blues and jazz, it was Charlie Christian. So the two of those guys. And if you get a chance, check out some of Lonnie Johnson's later stuff and earlier stuff, because it's incredibly great, unbelievable stuff. That a guy is playing, he can play and sing. He could play like crazy, and he could sing. And there weren't many people. I mean, there were women singers and players back then too that were as good as that. I mean, Sister Rosetta Tharpe could play like crazy.
Oh, without a doubt, one of the best, and could sing too. I mean, I think that some of those videos of the white SG Custom, like that,
Yeah, in her
that's the
fur
the
coat.
coolest that guitar has ever looked.
In her fur coat there, that video they have of her. I think it was in London or somewhere. But
Is
yeah,
that the
that's
video of Up Above My Head?
yeah,
Yeah, I know that one well, and it's a
yeah.
great song too.
So yeah, those that's where it all started back in the early 20s, 30s, that period. And that's what guys like BB King and Albert King and Freddie King got all of their that's where they learned from, those guys. And
Well, that's what one of the things I love about blues is you can trace that lineage back even now. If you listen to someone, and if you go deep enough, generally you're going to end up back at the same few influences because everyone is building off that same stuff that was the earliest recorded blues stuff in the 20s.
yeah, if you
and
get a
and you end
chance,
up, if you trace influence back to influence back to influence, that's generally where you end up.
if you get a chance, check out Chris Thomas King's book that he wrote last year.
Oh,
It,
okay.
you know who he is?
Yeah.
He wrote a book about the history of blues, and it's fascinating book about all those people. He talks about Lonnie Johnson. He talks about all of the Louisiana people that were doing blues back then. He talks about um, the metamorphosis of blues players over the years. I mean, it's a great book. If you get a chance, check it out. He's got it out. It's I forget the name of it, but I interviewed him and we talked about it, and he was just fascinating the stuff that he learned about the history.
Yeah, I'm sure it sounds like a great book.
So let's talk about your recording career. You started out with an EP, an extended play, back in 2017, and
Yep.
then your full length came out in 2019, which I'm gonna play after this interview complete, from cover to cover, so people can hear you. So let's talk about new music because it's been 2 years
It has. I mean, it's been really now 3 years. I mean, I think
almost.
funny
Yeah.
enough, um, I forget the exact date, but I'm pretty sure the Keep on Turning came out January. It was either 19th, 20th, or 21st. So almost, you know, three years to the day, very close to it. And the original plan was that came out January 2019. Original plan was okay, gonna tour on it for a year, and was planning on going back into the studio sometime around late spring, early summer of 2020. And that was still the plan, was kind of writing a ton leading up to an early days of COVID in, March, April 2020. And as you know, so much of releasing a record now and actually selling said record and promoting said record is being able to tour said record. And once that went out the window, for me, I really put a lot of the recording plans on hold. I had a lot of friends who did have records come out during COVID, but most of those that I know of, those were recorded before COVID struck, and were really even delayed to try to wait until touring was possible. And then I would have done the same if I had a record in the bag. I wasn't going to wait 3 years to release it. But it really turned into a thing of, it's like, okay, I can go in, do a record and release it with no idea if I can effectively tour it, or I can wait and try to at least time it when then things get back to normal. So 3 years was not the original plan, but I think I can say pretty confidently at this point the record's going to be out before it's 4 years between records. Of
Wow.
the plan right now is actually next month, early March, to go in the studio, record the new record, and then on that timeline, hopefully it'll be out mid to late 2022. So new music is coming.
You mean
Really excited to.
2023?
What's that?
You mean 2023, right? You said 4 years.
That would be January 2023. So, within the next year. So before 2023. I think it'll be either, sometime late summer, fall, winter, depending on how it gets released of this year, because it's going to get recorded in the next, month or two.
Well, let's talk about that.
Sure.
Any new songs you've written for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now, going through that process of picking the cream of the crop to go in to record, really nailing down on what the songs are going to be, getting into the arrangement and getting all the plans of where it's going to be recorded, how it's going to be recorded, and who's going to play on it. So, all those kind of discussions and plans are ongoing right now, and very excited to get some new stuff out, because it's also, as a younger, newer artist in terms of not age but catalog, over the last couple of years, the live set list, it's harder to really diversify the live set list when you have an EP and one full length to pull from, because you want to play the stuff that you've recorded, not just pull out a bunch of covers. So it'll be nice for that reason too, to have a whole other full length of material to start playing live.
Any special guests on the record you're looking at?
Potentially, if there are, not ready to be disclosed at this point.
Okay.
But that's being discussed. Kind of all the stuff is, very very much still in the, I wouldn't say planning stages, because I mean it is happening sooner rather than later, but I'm not really ready to spill the beans on too much. I like to keep a lot of the stuff close to the vest until it comes out.
So you were touring 2018, 2019 and then part of 2020 until COVID hit. So tell me a road story from from that period, because you were traveling. You weren't just local. You were traveling during that
I
time.
was traveling. I mean, I played a lot around the US. I went over and did a really successful UK tour, and the plans for 2020 had been return trip to the UK, Europe, and more extensively in the US. So it's interesting, because now it's sort of just picking up where we left off, of doing more in the US. I mean, the US is hard because living on the East Coast is really easy to make happen. And I've done plenty of up and down the East Coast into Tennessee and all that. But the middle of the country is really hard, because you start getting these long drives between cities, and routing gets tough. I've done the West Coast too, in the same way, where fly out, do some West Coast dates, fly back. But the goal is to get to more of the middle of the US, and also just, keep going with some of the cities that at this point, now in 2022, that I haven't been to since 2019, because touring got cut off very quickly in 2020. I had 3 Florida tours delayed, and now finally getting back down there in mid-March, which will be great. And there are other cities where it's really on the list of trying to hit some of those mid-Atlantic cities that I just haven't been to for a while. And it's an interesting thing at this point, because it, again, feels like with some of this stuff, I was just there a few months ago, and then you look at the calendar and it's like, it really has been 3 years. And I have been somewhat fortunate, well, depending how you frame it, of I didn't try to go out super early again where everything was just getting scheduled and canceled. So, but at this point, that means I really do want to be getting stuff on the books and getting it happening for 2022. A lot of that, of course, revolves around the new record.
So back then, did you have a booking agent? You have one now.
Yeah, for part of it, yes. For part of it, no. I mean, that UK tour I booked myself, and a lot of the stuff back then I was booking myself. I mean, the booking agent kind of came into play, unfortunately, a little too close to when COVID shut everything down. I mean, got in a really nice Florida tour right before everything shut, and had plans for a lot more, and a lot more was getting scheduled, and then stuff just kind of ground to a halt.
That's interesting that you booked your UK tour because there's a lot of logistics behind doing something like that and making sure you have an agent there that's protecting you from all kinds of things that go on in Europe that you have protection here in the United States. What was that like for you trying to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many friends over in the UK and Europe that I had some tips on which venues and which promoters were nice to work with, but I don't know. It was just I had been getting a lot of requests to play in the UK. Album had done relatively well over there, and a lot of it is of when I want to do something. Sometimes it's just,
Just
okay, how
do it.
can we make this happen?
Just do it.
And definitely my management played a part in making that happen, and had some tips for, you're right, the logistics in terms of visas and international travel always just get a little more difficult. And that's one of the things that now has gotten significantly more challenging, especially with pandemic travel restrictions. Of it makes
Yeah.
some of that stuff, even when things are relatively good right now, pretty difficult. But yeah, it was a great tour. I mean, the big eye opener over there was everything's so close together. Played up in Scotland, played down in kind of south of London the next day, and it was like a 5-hour train ride. Where here, that's getting you, maybe from Boston down to Philly or so, and that's not that far in the scope of the
Right.
country.
So yeah, that's an interesting thing that you did that yourself because like I said, if you don't have a good promoter, you got to figure out where you're going to stay, how you're going to do all those things when you're over there and that's great. You were able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up being backed by a band based in the UK, so that made it easier where I wasn't traveling my band over, just from a cost
Yep.
basis of allowing me to do it with fewer gigs on the books to make it somewhat close to, not totally losing my shirt over there. But the gigs, I was also really fortunate of leading up to the dates there, ended up on the cover of one of the two major UK blues magazines. So in terms of promotion, that did wonderfully. Of first gig over there, I show up for sound check. I'm loading in, and it's a beautiful club, great stage, great sound, get all set up. And I go back to the green room. I'm eating dinner, and I'm nervous the entire time because I'm in Edinburgh, have never been there in my life. And it's that thought of, are there going to be two people when I walk out? And there's always that. We've all played those gigs where there are no people there, and it's one of just the most anticlimactic feelings. And I walk out, and it's a full house. It's like, okay, immediately it takes that weight off my shoulders. And the dates over there were like that. In terms of hotels, I think a lot has been made easier. First of all, the tour dates, part of the contract was hotels provided. So it was really finding hotels on a couple off days. And that's easy enough when you're in decently major cities. I mean, I think I had to do that one night in Edinburgh, one night in London. Not all that difficult. I'm decently comfortable with public transportation. The train system's great over there. And it was one of those things where, and I've done this with not just touring, but multiple things of you figure out what you want to do and you do it and you figure out how to deal with all the problems as you go.
Yep.
And if they come up, there's very little that at the end of the day you can't figure out some sort of solution to.
All right, let's talk about Matt Schofield and your relationship with him. I know you have a relationship with him because you played with him other places. Talk to me about when you first met Matt and where.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think back of, I think the first time, and I've listened to his music for years. I mean, I've known who Matt was and how great a player he is since, probably going on 10, 12 years now or so. I believe the first time we actually met, and I could be forgetting something completely because I don't think I saw him play live. I had the idea, or I think it was NAMM 2019 out in California. NAMM's a big music convention out there, and had a friend who the year prior had put on kind of a guitar superstar show at a venue in Fullerton, little 200 capacity venue, about 10, 12 minutes away from the convention center. And he was moving his show to a bigger venue. He ended up moving it to one right near the convention center, kind of about an 800 capacity room. And we had done some touring together, and I asked him, so you're not going to use that room for this year? You mind sending me the contact? I might try to put something together. And at that point had just recorded my last album. It was about to come out. And Josh Smith, who's fantastic blues guitar player, lives out in LA. He had produced the record. I had done it at his studio. First person I asked onto the bill was Josh. And then also Kirk Fletcher, who's a good friend of Josh. I had met Josh and Kirk a couple of years before that. And then ended up, and we're on video right now, and you can probably see the amps sitting behind me, and had the idea of asking Two Rock if they would want to come on board as a sponsor and backline the show. And through talking with Eli at Two Rock, he suggested, oh, why don't I call Matt? I'm sure he'd love to get on board. So that was the first show we played together, was that. And it was also Ariel Posen on the bill. And I think the first time I met him was at that NAMM show, and we played that show together. Did another one the next year where it was slightly different bill, but Matt was still on there. In the meantime, saw him at show when he went to it, when he came and played in Boston. And then funny enough, he was one of the last people I really of the kind of guitar player community that I got to hang out with before COVID. I was down on a Florida tour, and the first night I got down was right before the Bonamassa cruise was leaving from Fort Lauderdale. And Josh Smith played a show at the Funky Biscuit in Boca the night before. And Matt, I was there hanging out. Matt came out, was hanging out. So we were, having a couple drinks, hanging out there. And then I was playing the next couple nights, but had one night off while I was down there aside from that. And Matt and Christine were playing at a place up kind of in the Jupiter area. And I drove up, hung out, we played a bit together, and it was a great night. And little did we know that within a month after that, nothing would be happening for the next couple of years. But yeah, we've just kind of, through some gigs together, and then being in the same places at the same time, either him playing up here, me playing down there, have gotten a chance to hang out some. So yeah, Matt's a great guy, great friend, as well as a wonderful guitar player, of course.
I didn't get to mention to you guys that night. I thought you should do that every year at Christmas time. Have like a extravaganza with Matt bringing players on. And I was gonna,
That would certainly be fun.
wouldn't it? Here in New England, if he did that every year, it would be great.
Yeah, I always those kind of shows are always fun. I mean, as I said, I've done a few of them where I've put them together out at NAM, and they're a blast. It's always just, to do those, they have to kind of come together organically like that, where you just have everyone in the right place at the right time, because otherwise everyone just lives so far away
Yep.
that trying to orchestrate one of those can be difficult.
So how does everybody find out about you? You have a website? You on social media?
Yep. So website is www.sethrosenbloom.com, and all my tour dates are up there. All the links to how you can find my music are up there. And I believe also the links to all the social medias, but I'm on Facebook, on Instagram. I am not on, I kind of draw the line at Twitter and TikTok of, I don't do those, but that's a little too much. But yeah, on all the socials. And in terms of music, the physical copies are on Amazon and other online retailers, and then for digital accessing, on all the major digital retailers, whether that be Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, and on and on.
Great. Well, Seth, I want to say thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy day. And I am going to play your latest CD from 2019 all the way through right after this interview. So there you go.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
And I look forward to seeing you soon. Maybe we'll get you into the studio. Come play in the studio when we let people back in again.
That would be great.
I would love to have you.
Have a great one.
You
Thank
too.
you.
We'll see you.